Proper land governance is designed to promote economic growth and social development, but realistically, how can officials balance that with population needs? Let's bring in Maria Luisa Mendonca, a professor at the University of Rio de Janeiro, whose work looks at agricultural systems and natural resource conflicts. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you very much.
This year's theme is responsible land governments. In your opinion, in what areas are the biggest reforms still needed?
Well, I think it's very important to understand that Brazil, for example, it has the highest land concentration in the world. At the same time, 70% of the food produced for local markets is produced by small farmers, not only in Brazil, but around the world. The small farmers are responsible to produce the majority of food. So when you have a large concentration of land, then you also have a problem in big cities like Rio because of the dislocation of families from the countryside to the cities in a non-organized way. So I think it's very important to democratize land, to prioritize support for small farmers who produce the majority of the food, and also in a sustainable and ecological way.
How important is the use of new technology like drones and GPS to map and assess the land and do exactly what you just described?
Yeah, I think it's important to measure the expansion of monocropping and the destruction this causes. In Brazil, we have a huge expansion of monocropping of sugarcane, of soybeans that are commodities that are not for human consumption, and also create huge environmental and social impacts, displacing indigenous and peasant communities and creating environmental destruction, polluting water sources. So I think we need to prioritize a sustainable ecological model of agriculture based on small farmers that can really help also with the problem of climate change.
And you touched on this a moment ago, land use versus land rights. It's still a major issue in Latin America, especially in Brazil. In some areas, it's turned to violent. What are your thoughts on that? Will it always be an issue?
Yes, Brazil has one of the most unequal distributions of land in the world, and there have been hundreds of cases of violence against peasants, indigenous communities that fight for the right to land. So we have hundreds of indigenous leaders who have been killed. So I think we need to frame this as a human rights issue. Land rights are key for the production of food and for us to be able to deal with climate change. I think we cannot deal with that if we continue to prioritize monocropping, extensive monocropping of commodities that have huge social and environmental impacts.
And very quickly, how do governments then and the private sector and others work towards sustainable land governance while combating climate change?
Yeah, I think, again, the majority of subsidies and support have to go towards small farmers who produce food for local markets. We cannot continue to prioritize large monocropping of commodities because this it's proven now that this has a huge impact on climate change. Actually, industrial agriculture has as much impact to climate change as fossil fuels. So it's based on oil, largely chemical inputs that have huge impacts on global warming.
All right, Professor Maria Luisa Mendonca in New York, thank you for your perspective.